Hello and good morning and welcome. Good morning, Jens. How are you this fine day?
Hi, good morning, Greg. I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah, another episode of Wirecast in the Wild. Thanks for joining everyone who's going to tune in either now or at some point in the near future to watch the replay. The purpose for those who are joining us for the first time on this particular broadcast is to have a look at some of the challenges with live streaming, particularly with the software that we use, which is Wirecast. And, Jens and I, we're computer geeks. We kind of know a little bit about some of this stuff behind the scenes. So we want to see if we can help some other people in the community and get some questions from you and just generally make things better for everyone. Before we do anything, though, I'm just going to welcome people to put questions in the chat room. We've got YouTube live chat running, and one of our colleagues is theoretically going to be having a look at the chat and bringing some comments up onto the screen. So if everything works, those chat comments will come up in a little while. Oh, maybe not just yet. Let's clear that. I'm trying to get the chat comments working, but we've had a fun morning this morning. I'll just say that much. So what's happening in your world? What have you been doing broadcast-wise this week? Have you been doing much broadcasting?
Yeah, yesterday I had a live stream for 4.5 hours. That went flawlessly. So kind of busy. A lot of trainings and yeah, the usual day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so before we get into anything else, let me see. I've got the chat thing up now. So if our friend is in the background, feel free to try and put some stuff up on the screen now. So without further ado, what I want to do is to have a look at some of the recent forum comments and use that information as discussion and topic starters for what it is that we're doing today. So let me go and search for some things that I'd flagged before and see what we can do. The first one, I'll just click on that. There we go. So the first one is a new forum post just from this morning. No audio source from USB source. This one came in from Ryan, and he's working on a Mac. He's using a trial version of Wirecast. Particular audio source that he's having troubles with. We spoke about something very, very similar to this last week, and ultimately there's some things that Apple have done on their operating system so that when you install a set of drivers, you need to make sure you accept that in from the security preferences of that to make sure that it's actually available to other applications. So that's the first point. The second point I'd say is if you're having trouble with Wirecast, test it with another app first. Does it work into another app? If it is working to another app and it's not working to Wirecast, that's certainly when the Telestream people can probably help you out. But give that a go first. Any other thoughts from you, Jens?
Yeah, usually when you buy an interface, they ship some kind of software with it. So my advice would be test with the native software from the vendor. See if you can hear, see everything, check the connections. It should come up in their software at least. And then once you've done that, you can choose different programs like Wirecast or VLC and try to get sound or image in there.
Okay. And one other thing is just make sure if you're using the Pro version of Wirecast, and you mentioned you're using the trial version, but certainly with the Pro version, you've got the audio mixer where you can do channel allocations and all sorts of other things in there. Make sure you've got it enabled for what it is that you're having a look at in the audio mixer and the audio mapper.
But default in Wirecast is track 1. So if you don't play with it that much, it should work instantly, bringing up the source in Wirecast.
Yeah, should work first go. But the other comment that I'll make is if it's a multi-track input device that's more than just stereo input, sometimes you may have a challenge there as well. So that's the other thing to look out for as well. Before we started today, we were talking about a post in the forum about RTMP and XML. Did you happen to get a chance to have a look at that one, or?
Yeah, I briefly read it. To me, it sounds that there's no interference or no relation. Usually, if you use RTMP streams and enter the stream key, you should be good to go. This is not using, from my understanding, this is not using the API. It uses just the standard RTMP, and you have to switch in YouTube and in Facebook manually. So that should be okay, doing it this way, I would say. But yeah, I haven't read it in full detail, to be honest. So I just flew over it.
Okay, let's move to something that we are a little bit more familiar with. This one was from last week, streamers out of sync. And someone was quite animated, shall we say, about this particular posting. There's been a lot of discussion on there. Streamers out of sync, thanks Wirecast.
In general, I would say it's, if you do a live stream and you expect things to work, you buy Wirecast, it's a pro kind of software, and you just expect things to work. And sometimes with the dynamic frame rate that Wirecast uses, you run into trouble. But that is as long as I use Wirecast. Think back to version 4 or something, that they never have changed that dynamic frame rate.
So I want to talk about this a little bit, because this is something, I'm relatively new to streaming and video, but I've been an IT geek for a while. And I heard a couple of people, yourself and Matthew, talking about dynamic frame rate. And I said, what's going on? Surely they're not doing something stupid. It must be a static frame rate, and it couldn't be true. But from my further investigation, it is true. Why would someone use a dynamic frame rate, and how's that going to play out with content networks like YouTube?
Yeah, the problem is not during live, I would say. The problem is during post. If you have a local recording and then you do some cuts and edits and try to upload afterwards, even doing these cuts and edits, in some software you face just problems in the NLE kind of stuff, because you have to resync the audio to the video, and this is just extra work that should not happen. So if you record, it should be in sync at the beginning and should be in sync at the end. But just with Wirecast dropping frames due to system shortcomings, I would say very generally this way, Wirecast is compensating these shortcomings with dropping frames.
So let's talk about that right now. So for an unknown reason, even though I'm running 15% CPU right now, for some unknown reason, I've had 457 dropped frames today. Now, to be fair, there's something weird happening with my internet earlier this morning, and it seems to have stabilized now. Is it something that can be caused by internet, or is it more likely to be a CPU and or GPU capacity issue that's going to cause that, or both?
The internet-facing stuff would be the RTMP queue, but not the frame rate. Frame rate, or at least that is what Wirecast, how Wirecast explains it. they reduce the system load by dropping frames. So that's how they compensate for shortcomings. Usually, one would reduce the image quality, so reduce bandwidth to free some resources for the system, for the encoder. Wirecast is doing it another way. They drop frames because they say each frame less to calculate, release resources from the system. And this is very uncommon, I would say, and introduces problems in post and conversions, things like that.
So in terms of how you would fix that up, right? So if we've just recorded, and I'm doing a local recording of this broadcast today, when I previously uploaded that local recording from a previous show, the audio was totally out of sync. So that's the symptom that we're talking about.
Yes,
Okay.
because the more frames you drop during the show, the more the audio is out of sync. So in the beginning of the show, everything looks good. The longer the show runs, the more unsync it gets.
So let's ask this question. Who's right? Who's wrong? Is it correct and valid to have a variable frame rate? Is it within the spec for an MP4 file to have a variable frame rate? And if yes, then is it YouTube's fault and they should be patching it on when they receive it? Or is Wirecast wrong in terms of how they're saving the file in the first place?
I would give a two-folded answer. Usually, from a player perspective, you can throw anything at a player, and the player is built to reproduce the stream. If it's 25 frames or 13.2781, whatever frame rate, that's the purpose of the player. Whatever you throw at the player, it just plays it. With NLE and other kind of software or re-encoding, you set some expectations on your profile, and if you don't pass the expectations, it runs out of sync or into trouble, to keep it very simple.
So who should be fixing it? I mean, what's your opinion? I've got mine, and I'd like to hear from you. And certainly, I'll bring up the chat window in my background in a couple of minutes to have a look. But what do you think? Should it be fixed by Wirecast? Let's say we do this recording today. We've finished the show, and we press the upload button, and it doesn't work on YouTube. Is it Wirecast's job to fix and clean that file, or is it YouTube's job to play that file correctly?
I would say Wirecast should fix it, because using dynamic frame rate is a valid way to compensate for issues on the system, but an uncommon way, I would say. If you have live view encoder or any other encoder in hardware, and the encoder is almost up to its limits, then the encoder would decrease the picture quality. Wirecast has the focus on picture quality, and they want to drop frames. They say we keep the same quality, but reduce the amount of pictures to lower the data that is processed. All other vendors and all other systems would keep the frame rate and reduce the quality of each frame. So these are two valid approaches to receive the same stuff, but the way Telestream chose seems to be a way where you run into post issues.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. So I tell you what, sometime between now and next time we do broadcast, I'd love to go and spend some time and try and get a FFmpeg command that we can post maybe in the description for this video of how to clean it up without spending money on some extra software. FFmpeg should be able to clear this up, yes?
Yes, FFmpeg. I usually use a software called Video Redo. This is, I don't want to advertise anything, but it's a native cut software, usually used to cut advertising out of recordings, like television recordings. But you can do 20 cuts and it processes it natively. So it just recalculates the gobs that has to be recalculated and not the entire file. So you can cut a 10-hour file in 10 seconds. Sure. And save it. So that's a very big advantage with this software.
But in this case, we're wanting to re-encode it and to get the frame rate corrected. And yes, it's ultimately going to duplicate the frame before the dropped frame to try and repair it and put it back together. That's what's going to happen, yeah?
Yeah, the Video Redo has a quick fix function, and it runs over the file and fixes shortcoming in the specs. So I use this to fix issues in post with Wirecast. You can use Switch, another software from Telestream, as well, and fix it.
Yeah, so I know that there are commercial solutions, and I know Telestream do provide an application. There's someone who I've read in the forum was fairly vocal about saying, hey, if you're going to create bad files and you've got a piece of software that can fix it, you should provide it free of charge until you fix your original application. Now, there is some arguments for that, but in the short term, I think it's fair to say as a community, let's help each other, and we'll see if we can get an FFmpeg command, because it's a tool that's available on just about every platform. Anyway, let's move on from that. Let's go to the next topic today. And this one is actually interesting because it affected us today. So this one, and I'll just go to the beginning of the chat. Rendezvous quits randomly yet again. And, oh, I can't believe it. At this exact moment, as soon as I mentioned it, oh, you dropped out. Now, I can't hear you at the moment anymore.
Okay, I had a black screen.
Yeah.
I had a black screen for a couple of seconds, but it recovered automatically.
Yeah, we couldn't have timed that any better, but look, Rendezvous Dropouts, let's just quickly talk about it. So the one that we just had there was, in my opinion, probably just an internet-related dropout, and it recovered. So that's the good news. The second type of dropout that we actually had today before the show started was where you dropped out and you couldn't get back in no matter what you did. I was looking at my Rendezvous dashboard and there was no one waiting to join. To work around that, my solution is to press the disconnect button in the Rendezvous dashboard and then press reconnect rather than starting a new session. I don't want to start a new session because I don't want to have to go and send you new keys and all of that kind of stuff. But here's the bad thing. What if you've got 2, 3, 4, or 5 guests? When that happens and you want to get that one guest that dropped out back in, you've got to drop off everyone else. You've got to disconnect the main session. And then when you reconnect it, will they all come back into their same spots in the show, in the shot file that they were in before? In my experience this morning, we actually had this problem today, and Jens dropped out. He couldn't get back in. I disconnected, I reconnected, and he was not appearing in any of the shots that we had already configured. He had a new name that was appearing in the input sources. So Long story short, it's a bug, it's a problem, it's a known problem. The workaround, as much as I would call it, it's not really a workaround, it's a kludge. But the solution to the dropout is disconnect and reconnect the rendezvous session, put your guest back into all of the shots where they appeared before and hope that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I think the problem lies within the WebRTC implementation. Craig, the forum moderator, confirmed that Wirecast is using a turn server. And what a turn server does is it grabs all the data and redistributes to all participants like in a hub-spoke situation. So the turn server is the hub and the guests are the spokes, and it duplicates the data for all guests.
I'm going to disagree with you there. That is not correct. Even though Craig has told you that, it is not correct. And the reason I know this, being on a small bandwidth third world country like Australia, our internet is not great. And so I am very conscious of my bandwidth that's going out. So leaving my house, the bandwidth that I have for every rendezvous guest, I'm sending the same thing to all of my rendezvous guests. It's not using a turn server for outbound bandwidth. It's not hub and spoke.
It should be. So it depends. WebRTC has two flavors. Usually WebRTC is point-to-point communication. So if A and B, two parties that want to talk to each other on a public internet and they can see each other, you just use the signaling server and you make the you invite each and every other to everybody, so that A knows the IP address of B and vice versa. So A and B can start communicating directly, and this is what happens right now. So checking my router, I see I have a UDP connection to Australia, and I see data flow. So this is the flavor one. The flavor two is if you're behind a nutted or a well-protected network like you would have in enterprise situations, where a lot of firewalls and intrusion protection software or hardware is running, then you can't establish a point-to-point connection. And this is the point where the turn server kicks in.
So what would be really cool, in my opinion, is for the ability to manually force it to use a turn server instead of attempting to do point-to-point. So for people who do have limited bandwidth connections, I want to go and force that. So now that we've had this discussion, I might do some experimentation at some point in the near future and deliberately block inbound connection to Wirecast from anything other than Telestream IP ranges, and see if that helps to force it to use the turn server. That might be an interesting experiment.
Yes, it makes sense in a situation where bandwidth is limited. But Telestream tries to avoid these setups because you pay for all the data. And if you host the turn server, which Telestream does, you have to pay for all the data. So the turn server gets very quickly very expensive.
Yes and no. I mean, the cost of servers and data center, by the time you're hosting a server these days, the internet comes as part of the package. And if you're hosting a cluster, you know, the data is not exactly free, but it's not exactly a significant extra cost. I mean, the real cost, I think, is in the infrastructure cost to be able to support the data. That's just my opinion.
Yes, it both comes to the same end solution. You need a beefy box on Amazon to handle all the traffic and the user sessions and so on and so on. So it's not a X small instance. It might be a X large or even bigger.
Fair call. Fair call. Okay, so let's just finish with this topic, right? So Rendezvous quitting. So point one, it can quit and drop out and reconnect randomly, and that can be due to network problems. Number two, I have seen an instance where a particular user on his system was disconnecting and reconnecting randomly. I saw something unusual in the system logs that seemed to indicate it was certificate-based, and there was some certificate errors with the traffic going in and out. Never got to the bottom of that, and I'm going to try and spend some time with him and debug that again at some point in the future. Number three is where it disconnects and you can't reconnect for whatever reason. Don't know what that is, but it appears that the service at the Wirecast end, on my computer in this case, was not accepting the inbound connections, or there was a turn server or some other signaling server that was failing and didn't maintain the session. Whatever the cause is, restarting the Wirecast session at my end fixes that problem. So those are the kind of few things. Anything else that you've got on your mind?
Yeah, just let me add the basic understanding how the connection is built. I currently use UDP connection to you, and UDP is the fire and forget. So if something happens on the route from Europe to Australia, the TTL, time to live, runs out, or just route changes or whatever happens in between, the data is lost and gone. And it is possible that it comes to a point that the data is not recoverable because there's no retransmits or things like that.
But having said that, that's a smart decision to do that rather than to use TCP, for example.
Absolutely. TCP would be the other option, and TCP is three-way handshake, and you can't use TCP for real-time communication. So WebRTC is real-time communication, and that's the reason why you use UDP. But keeping that in mind, that UDP is not a perfect transmission. That's why a few folks introduced SRT, the Secure Reliable Transport, which is wrapped around it and allows for forward error correction and things like that.
Okay. I haven't dug into SRT. I had heard about its existence, but, does SRT run on top of UDP, or has it got its own separate protocol number?
To be honest, I don't really know.
I would assume that it runs on top of UDP, and that if, in terms of forward error correction, happy days. But ultimately, if a packet is lost through UDP, that it's able to detect it to still put the other packets into a buffer or into a stream and manage the refetch of that packet out of sequence. And if the other end's able to put it back together before it is needed, then happy days. And I'm assuming that that's what it's going to do. That's my guess.
Yes, it's called ARQ. This is the technology that Zixi uses as well. So Zixi, SRT work in the same kind of way. It's adaptive requests. So once the receiver has out of sequence data, it requests a few packets, so it fills up the buffer so that the sequence is perfect again. And this works up to a certain amount of failures. If there are more failures, the retransmits will kill the connection.
Okay. Happy days.
It seems SRT is kind of more intelligent. So that was my Zixi experience, but this is 5 years in the past. They might have changed in the meantime.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on as I go to the next one in the list. Virtual camera always on or hotkey. Let's just bring that up on the screen. So this one came in, someone is asking, is there a way to have a virtual camera always on, or to save the setting, or have it as a hotkey? We want to have it going into Zoom, and he don't want to have other users to use Wirecast, yada, yada, yada. Want a quick way to turn it on and off. Short answer, hotkeys in Wirecast are fairly limited in their capability. They can be linked into shots, which is cool, but certainly not any of the other more advanced functions. I've personally used an Akai APC40 Mark II controller, and I would love to be able to do key assignment using that particular device to do different things. Unfortunately, it's not available at this time, and there's a feature request that he can submit on that. Speaking of which, I should go and put this up on the screen, and I'll do that now. Let's go to timeline.
During your preparation, I use palette gear, and these kind of controllers are able to emit a keyboard. So everything in Wirecast that you can control with a keyboard. This is not everything, but a lot of functions. You can control with these palette gear buttons. They have three kind of stuff. They have faders, they have buttons, and they have knobs. And whatever you can control, you can control remotely Wirecast or via a USB controller. It works different to the supported one. This is just everything you can do with a keyboard. You can create a shortcut, and you can query this shortcut with the palette gear. The MIDI part, the palette gear supports MIDI as well, but Wirecast has just a few controllers allowing them to control. So the palette gear is not in the list, so you're limited to the keyboard mode.
Okay, so I've just got a title that I built. I want to put this up on the screen, and there we go. So this is a not a community forum. I should have typed that better. Community tracker. My bad. Wirecast.gregkuhnert.com. At this URL, I've got a tracker, and I'll put that up on the screen just now. So let's do that now. Ultimately, feature requests and bugs I've been tracking here, and they have been getting some good results from Telestream. So here's the tracker, and the good news is last completed ideas. As you can see, these are things that were put into the tracker, and these have all been completed, which is absolutely awesome compared to what it used to be like. We've got some other ones that are showing here as planned and so on. There's a bunch of submitted ideas that are going to go through prioritization with Telestream now. But here's the good thing. Right, so if you click on bug, and you can have a look at all of these different ideas, and people have voted on them. So Telestream can actually have a look and say, well, lots of people have voted on this one, so therefore we're going to do that first because it's very much in demand. So I encourage anyone watching this video who's a regular Wirecast user, log on to this forum or to this tracker, wirecast.gregkuhnert.com. It's not officially supported by Telestream, but unofficially they do look at it and use that to help prioritize their future development. So certainly that request that was coming in before with regard to virtual camera, hotkey mapping and all of that kind of thing, that could absolutely go into that tracker there and vote for it, and hopefully your request will come through.
Yeah, I think the MIDI part has to be improved in Wirecast. Usually, Telestream should create functions within Wirecast that could be called from different ends. So via API, via MIDI, via whatever, a HTTP request. But Wirecast is currently not capable of this. I have the feeling that the internal functions are kind of missing. I don't have understanding of the source code, but this is how it seems to me.
Yeah, partially that, but I think also they pull open different parts of the code at different times, and they don't want to touch the hornet's nest, perhaps. If they're working on audio, they don't want to play with MIDI at the same time. I'm just speculating. But anyway, let's move on. I've got a couple more that I want to get through today. The next one is Rendezvous guest hearing echo. So there's been a fair bit of discussion on this topic. Let me put it up on the screen. So this particular user is having challenges of echo. Now, Rendezvous, I think, I would say it's a dark art. So getting the audio right for Rendezvous, there's a lot of things that you need to do. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'll see if I can get my screen capture of this screen up. Now, this is where it's all going to go bad. So
yeah, the echo stuff comes into play when you have speakers open and the microphone in parallel. And then
I think it's a bit more than that. So what I'm just trying to do, so here's our Rendezvous dashboard at the moment. So over on the right-hand side, here's a couple of little tips. Once I start my broadcasting, oops, wrong window, there we go, the HDMI. So normally I have, before a show, before a broadcast, I set this to Rode NT USB. This is my headphones that I use to listen to what's happening during a broadcast, my headphones that I've got on now. After the pre-show and I've got my guest into all of the shots that I need to get them into, I set it to something else. Now, in my case, I set it to HDMI, which is the monitor that I'm using to capture the web pages. But I've got the volume turned all the way down. In a future version of Wirecast, I've requested that they actually have the option to turn this off. I want to turn off Rendezvous dashboard audio monitoring once a broadcast starts. That way, I'm not going to hear that audio plus the live audio from my guests going to air. That causes echo in my headphones. So that's the first thing. Second thing, over here in the this section over here, we've had a look at this before. There's been a lot of changes in this area. And at the moment, Jens is unable to hear any audio other than my microphone. Ideally, we want him to be able to hear the live output of anything else that I'm sending to air, but it's broken. It's dead. Now, Wirecast had good intentions with a lot of the things that they were doing here, but if I turn that on now, and let's do it for the sake of argument, I'm going to keep talking and I'm going to turn this on and I'm going to ask you to explain what you hear. So tell me what you're hearing now.
Yeah, I hear the echo, which is kind of expected.
Okay. So what's happening is he's hearing the live output from this document and he's hearing my microphone. So if he's hearing me coming through two sources, what if I turn off this one?
Now I hear nothing.
Now, what was even worse was that when I turned off my microphone just now, he couldn't hear me, but neither could you. I'm still talking. Now, I'm going to keep talking, right?
Yeah, it's dead silent on my end.
So altering what sources I'm sending into the Rendezvous dashboard also affects your audio going to air, which is absolutely, totally unacceptable. So to answer the question of the user who was asking this originally, do not turn on live output from whatever document to send to your Rendezvous clients. It is broken. It is defective. Leave on your particular studio audio inputs, and your guests will be unable to hear any remote audio or video content. That's a limitation of Wirecast that we have now, and short answer is there's nothing we can do about it, but that's the workaround we have today.
Yeah, the bad is a lot of people like to show YouTube videos or trailers or introductional stuff, and this is bad because the Rendezvous guests don't hear the audio. They just have to guess what's happening.
Yeah. Okay, so I've gone through the list of items that I specifically wanted to talk about today. Are there any other hot topics for you that are happening at the moment, Wirecast-wise, in the forum?
Not now, nothing new, I would say. It circles around between the audio stuff with the Mac software. It circuits around Rendezvous issues. So I think that this is the main stuff. And yeah, the frame rate topic is recently popular. So
and the stream out of sync that we mentioned, yeah, the frame rate, same thing. I'm just having a look down to see if there are any other comments. Can't hear Rendezvous guest in Wirecast 12. We've just spoken about that. Stream out of sync, Rendezvous quit randomly, stream to Facebook. Or YouTube crashes in Wirecast 12.
Yeah, I think this is the general target stuff. So people want to send to YouTube, people want to send to Facebook. So some implementations missed with the new APIs from the two mentioned. So I can't see all the pages, I can't create events and things like that. So API-based stuff. In general, your and my advice is use Wirecast as an encoder, create the pages manually, encode RTMP, and then start manually on the targeted pages like Facebook and YouTube.
Yeah.
Don't use the API at all. And then you can send concurrently, no big deal, because usually with Facebook, that's the only allowed target. You can't do, if you use the APIs within their streaming profiles, Facebook is blocking all other stuff. So it's the one and only you can target at. You just get around if you use the standard RTMP server kind of setup, and then you can stream to YouTube and Facebook concurrently.
Let's just quickly go back to that a little bit because it is interesting. I personally do use the YouTube API, but the only thing I use it for is to get the RTMP URL. So I turn off the automation to start streaming inside Wirecast, and then I go to the YouTube Live dashboard and click the start button in the dashboard. I don't simulcast stream to Facebook, so I don't have that concern and that problem that a few other people have talked about. Under that kind of a circumstance, I think that's, for me, a reliable way of streaming to YouTube. If I was using the API, and we've briefly spoken about this before, but if I was using the API and we had internet troubles and I clicked the stop button on the broadcast or Command B on a Mac and then restart again, that's going to fail if you're using an event. Okay, so I strongly recommend people don't use the API if you're broadcasting, especially if you have challenges with internet, and maybe if you come from Australia where we're in a third world country with our internet. That's something that we're used to down here. So my workaround for that is don't use the API.
It's not only Australia, I would say, in terms of bandwidth, but in general, if you stream from the Green Meadow and you have to rely on 4G or satellite connections, that they can be weak. So good advice is try to bond multiple connections if you have multiple connections.
I'll just talk about that really, really briefly. Like you've told me multiple times, you want me to give this bonding stuff a go and get better bandwidth and reliability and all of that kind of good stuff. It sounds good. Part of me says, yes, I'm interested in it as a geek and as someone who understands the technology. The average end user of Wirecast, though, is not going to be in that kind of a circumstance. So the thing that I look forward to most is RTMP stop using TCP at some point in the future, and we talked about secure reliable transport before, assuming that runs over UDP or some other connectionless state protocol. That would be absolutely awesome. I look forward to that day. That's going to greatly help the challenges we have in third world countries like Australia. But I don't want to use the extra stuff to kind of doing channel bonding and channel aggregation, because it takes away the fun of just being a live streamer and you want to go and say something. Instead, you've got to have this really complicated, expensive rig. If you're doing it for commercial purposes, then yeah, absolutely. Go and spend the money on it. Go and get some equipment or some software that's going to aggregate the channels. But not for me. That's just my opinion.
In terms of cost, I have to correct you. Sorry. There is a software called Speedify. It costs $50 a year, and there you can bond as many connections as you have. So if you have 10 cellulars and connect them on a USB hub, you have 10 connections and you bond over 10 connections.
Yes, cost, but also complexity. So that's the other half of it. That I don't
sure,
want to. Yeah.
The advantage that you gain is even as I said, in situations where bandwidth is very, very rare and limited, you can get a decent amount of upload speed, bonding just
Agree with you. That might work for you or me. But for your average end user who's using a product like Wirecast, they don't want to have to get these extra bolt-on bits. They want to load the software and they want to stream. For that particular category of user, I don't think they're going to invest in Speedify, even if it's only $50 a year. The two things, like I said, connectionless protocols like something based on UDP or secure reliable transport or whatever, can't wait for that to happen. But the second thing that I would encourage Telestream to have a look at is bandwidth smoothing. We've seen multiple times before where the output bandwidth coming out of the encoder particularly on Apple systems, and Telestream have said quite rightly so, it's an Apple bug. If you're transitioning from one shot to another and there are some weird circumstances where for whatever reason it peaks to 10 times the configured RTMP output throughput. So what do you do about that? Well, Wirecast unfortunately does nothing, and it says, I'm just going to throw all of these packets out onto the network, even if they're never going to reach YouTube, which causes TCP retransmissions, which causes packets to get dropped. You get a retransmission storm. All of these packets are getting dropped, which is causing more and more retransmissions, which is using more and more data. So it's never going to end well. And just a quick little tip on that, right? So how to prevent that, and I've found this through trial and error and experimentation. If you use cross-dissolve instead of hard cuts from one shot to another, it prevents this particular problem. I've found that through experimentation. If I was to go and hard cut those same shots, it would very, very possibly, not every time, but very possibly cause an RTMPQ buffer to go up really high and the output throughput to go really high. That's just my tip for the day. Use cross-dissolve instead.
Yeah, that's a very good advice, because unfortunately Telestream is not smoothing the stream out, And that's a problem with people might ask, hey, then I can use CBR, so constant bitrate, on the profile. But even with CBR, it fluctuates, and it fluctuates a little bit less than with VBR, variable bitrate, but it still does. So we're not in an ideal world where CBR is constantly flat, knocked and locked to the data rate. Even in CBR, you see peaks and valleys.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've coming up to 50 minutes that we've been talking about some of this stuff, and it's been fun. Just a quick advance notice of days to come. For the next few weeks, I'm going to be traveling overseas with my family. So the day after next Friday, if we were going to do a show, Friday Australia time, I'm going to be getting ready and packing bags. So I'm not going to do this next week. The week after that, I'm going to be in Korea, and the week after that, I'm going to be in Korea, and so on. So apologies that there's going to be a little bit of a hiatus, but it's a well-deserved one. And at some time in the near future, we'll be back, and we're going to talk more about some of the Wirecast challenges that we see. But again, I'm just going to put that URL back on the screen again. So if you go to wirecast.gregkuhnert.com, go there and vote for your bugs or your feature requests. It is something that people at Wirecast have been taking note of and taking those and, asking their development teams to go and have a look at those things and fix the things that are high up on the list. So it's a good way of letting them know of how important some of these things are to you. Any last words from you, gents?
Yeah, let's keep connected in the forum, I would say. Have a well-deserved time off, and see you once you're able to stream again.
Sounds like fun. Okay, thanks, guys. I'll see you next time, and thank you for watching Wirecast in the Wild. Bye-bye for now.
Have a good day.